we're here, right, thanks for that. I won't talk about Man City and bore you with that, but it's been a great week. So I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. And the story I'm going to tell you, which one of these is forward? Well, that one is, okay. That's not working, hold on a second. Someone help me with this? I'm just going to go forwards and backwards or not. Hold on a second, technical problems. Can you just get me back up on and which one's the forward button? I can't tell on here. Yep. Good start. So, I'm going to tell you a bit of story about a cookie. And a cookie, a famous cookie, of course, Oreo biscuit. And which one's forward and backwards? So forwards is the bottom one. Okay, there you go. And how he went from this, which you've all seen before, the classic sandwich cookie from Oreo, to this. And the framework in which we did it. And it was based around the idea of looking at new ways of the future of snacking distribution and getting distribution done in a different way. And how we would actually deliver that to people in an engaging and very different and new experience. Because these days, we can pretty much print and manufacture in 3 dimensions all kinds of things. There's some sculpture being done here. And even here in a news story just in China, here in Shanghai, just literally last month, we're able to 3D print houses. These ones here were being done less than $10,000, I think it was, and pretty much able to be done in a day, 3D printing 10 full-size houses in a day. Not sure I want to live in this particular house, but there we go. The idea of actually managing to mass-produce those is quite something. So, where does that take us as well in the ability to sort of 3D print prosthetics and replaceables for various parts of the body has been going on for some time, even printing them actually in organic tissue. This prints strands of DNA, actual fibers of DNA produced over a short period of time. And at the same time as this 3D printing revolution's going on, and maybe some others may talk about that in food printing a bit later today, there's been some great innovation going on in terms of vending and vending machines. This is Coke's Freestyle. You may be familiar with it. What it ended up doing was allowing people to, because this is IP enabled and connected to the internet, what it allowed people to do is look at actually around the world where different flavors were popular. What people like to look at. You could mix up the flavors. You could put a bit of Coke in, a bit of Sprite, and a bit of Fanta. Tasted terrible, but you had the ability to play around with all those drinks and actually make up your drinks yourself. Someone told me I think there's 8 varieties of Sprite. If you wanted to know that, you could put one of each 8 varieties of Sprite in. And this information is all collected. All that information is used and is pooled, and you can see where various trends are going on different types of flavors around the world, and you can draw some conclusions from that. But what this was originally designed for was actually a new way of distributing Coke's products around the world, and some way in the future of circumnavigating some of the bottling issues. So the idea here was that it was concentrate that would be delivered, and then they could produce this rather than lots and lots of shelf space in fridges in convenience stores and supermarkets. So this trending information is all pooled, the data is all pooled, and that's interesting for what we're going to talk about next. But back to 3D printing, because it's getting very, very complex, and it's really interesting when you can produce stuff in edible form. And that's been done with sweets for a while. And these are very small and come in all kinds of different flavors, and the big producers like MakerBot or Foodini or ChefMate are all producing more and more complex forms. And that's quite interesting when you can do it in chocolate. These are chocolate 3D printers producing all kinds of designs and all kinds of shapes. Which reminds me of this.
Now watch the screen. Here it comes. There it is. Take it.
How can you take it? It's just a picture.
All right, you take it.
It's real.
Taste it. It's delicious. It's just gotten smaller, that's all.
It's perfect. It's unbelievable.
It's a miracle.
It's a TV dinner.
It's Wonka vision.
It could change the world.
1960s movies, it could change the world. The idea that you could actually produce something from a machine like that is edible, that is chocolate, can be done. I was at CES earlier this year, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. This is a printer on the right-hand side. It's quite an expensive printer. This one's about $50,000 US. But it's producing all of that chocolate you can see in that cabinet there. And these are large. These are big, sizable pieces and in intricate and complicated shapes, and they're all produced in chocolate. To be fair, not the nicest chocolate in the world. But nonetheless, that will change over time. So 3D printing printers, I don't know if you've seen some of this stuff. The idea that now you can print a base, you can print a topping, and bake it in the oven, and you can produce that at home in this kind of form. This is really interesting for our friends at NASA. We're thinking in terms of particularly deep space travel, how they're going to be able to get people to travel or survive in space for long periods of time with all of that food stuff they need. It's much easier to pack the raw materials. It's much easier to pack the powders, the waters, the requirements to actually then print in space, whatever that might be, particularly if we're thinking about missions to Mars, but even just long-term stays in the International Space Station. So they've been playing around this for some time. Which brings me to my Star Trek moment, I guess, number one. And we're going to go, I am a big fan of Star Trek. I try and weave it into all my presentations. And the Star Trek idea here is that arguably gave us the first flip phone, gave us the first idea of where mobile telephony was going to go, and really kind of paved that long before it was a reality from Motorola or others. And, you know, I guess the iPhone and everything stemmed from that. But they did a whole bunch of other stuff as well that was fantastic in its time in terms of the idea of a tablet that had a screen that you could tap on that would open applications to do things. This was even just in the 90s with Jean-Luc Picard over here. The idea of goggles or something you wear that would give you some other dimension of information as you're walking around, long before we get Google Glass. And also wrapped up in all of that was this.
Tomato soup.
There are 14 varieties of tomato soup available from this replicator, with rice, with vegetables, Bolian style, with pasta, with
Plain.
Specify hot or chilled.
Hot. Hot, plain tomato soup.
So give everybody ultimate choices, and he just wants hot, plain tomato soup. And obviously, when we come to 3D printing things, there's all kinds of opportunities to present themselves because we can produce those very foods in different kinds of raw materials. Not just what you'd normally get from a pizza place or from a burger joint. Actually, you can start to produce this in terms of really interesting materials, things that may be better for you, but taste the same. I don't know how much you know about this, it may come up today, but there's a lot of speculation about the ending of food hunger by the use of roaches, for example, because the nutrition in a roach is quite something. It's full of all kinds of vitamins, it's kind of all kinds of nutrients, it's nearly all protein, practically zero fat and trans fats, and if you make some consistency out of them, you then have a raw material to be able to print foods that actually look like steaks but have been made from roaches. And that's where this is kind of going, which is just fascinating, the ability to produce stuff in different types of materials. Doesn't look the most appetizing, I admit, but this is Foodini's printer over here, and the idea that you can now print, obviously, a burger. You need to put a bit more effort in the kitchen than you normally would by going down to McDonald's, and it's not as appealing as that. But you can actually now change the variance of what goes in the meat, so it's not actually beef that goes in it, or it's some soy complex. The idea of going down to the local FedEx office, and actually rather than printing something out like printable newspaper or printable paper, but printing out some kind of food stuff that's close to where you are, is really not a million miles away. So that brings us to what I'm going to talk about today, which is trending vending. Trending vending is our latest kind of innovation in this area to look at combining two things, what people want, capturing that, and delivering it to them in a really interesting, innovative, and unusual way. And it all started at a global meeting, which was in LA in sort of, well, just over a year ago last year, 25th, 26th of March, most notably 4 days together, 14 partner meetings and 567 PowerPoint slides. We met with a lot of the key people that are based out there. A lot of them are entertainment companies. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute because it spurned a really good idea that you'll see very shortly in films. But we also met with a lot of technology partners, media companies, music, etc. And there was a lot of ideation in a very, very sort of concentrated period of time. Which brings me to MAYA, who are our partners in doing this. MAYA stands for Most Advanced Yet Attainable. Not quite sure what that means, but they were a partner that basically are a thought leader in this piece in really putting together true innovation and bringing it to market. And there was a lot of work done. And I'll take you through some of the basics of that. A lot of ideation. Lots of ideas in terms of writing that down, in terms of capturing it in illustrations is always important. This went on for about 4 or 5 days. Some of the ideas that come up are out here. No idea is a bad idea. And then you start to distill it down to things that you think can potentially work. And this was one of the ones that came out, which was really interesting, was somebody come up with the idea of a robot that was actually maybe involved in a movie that was distributing Oreos. Well, that went on to, in one sense, where it takes us into the integration we've got coming out with Transformers, which will be in the movie coming out this year, where one of the Oreo vending machines actually turns into a Transformer. That's in the movie. You'll see that when it comes out, I think, in June. But what also came out of that idea was, wow, the idea of a vending machine giving an Oreo, but an individual Oreo to someone that asks for it, but asks for it in the way they want it, not just a standard Oreo, but a derivative of that, something different, something that's actually unique. And the idea there initially was that, oh, maybe there'd be a secret message inside the Oreo. Maybe if you twisted and licked it and took out all the icing, there'd be secret messages in there. So we played around with that idea for a bit. And here's a video of how that worked. Etching inside an Oreo cookie to actually deliver a message. This was the first ideas. And that was great. Seems to work fairly well. The problem with it is, as you'll see when it comes out, it looks great when you're finished with the etching in the moment, and it looks fine and you can read it, but it tastes burnt. You can't reproduce that anymore. That burnt flavor stays within the cookie on and on and on, so actually we had to abandon the whole idea. And what also existed in here as well was the idea of the consumer journeys. When we look at consumer journeys here and where that might be, MAYA have a framework for looking at this, which is the idea of what they call roses, buds, and thorns. Roses are ideas you can do right now. Thorns are ideas that really aren't very practical and probably won't help. And buds are ideas that you could do, but probably not quite now. They need a bit of nurturing, need a bit of time to go along. And the color coding on all of the Post-it notes you've got up there about that. But the exploration of that and how we do it was another area we looked at. And within that, how we were going to use data. And one of the ideas that popped up was the idea maybe of a pop-up store. The idea of something where people could go and interact with the brand with some kind of related technology. And we were thinking about Yahoo stores originally and the use of data and where that might take us. And so we explored that further, and I'll show you just these slides quickly, going into the whole idea of, innovation spaces, the vending machine idea, also in terms of following on from the history we've got of things like Daily Twist and how we're trying to tie that to current events. So the Daily Twist for Oreo to celebrate the 100 years anniversary, which was almost 2 years ago now, was based on the idea that you'd have a different Oreo iteration for something that was happening in the news at the time and on that particular day. And we're still doing that to this day now with Oreo, but we're looking at a whole bunch of other stuff in terms of trending news. So the 365 days, the fact that you'd have a different Oreo every day, that Oreo would say something about what was happening that day is still sort of part of our heritage, which was weaved into this. And then the idea, of course, for making a new sort of moment for consumption. And that moment for consumption being something we don't normally do. Something we don't normally do in terms of eating at home or even, having a cookie if you're out, having a cup of coffee or whatever it might be. A new moment to consume that and how we might make that work. And this was the first incarnation of a trending vending machine, the idea of putting actually trending and vending together. And we sort of played around with it a little bit, and this was our first thoughts. We were thinking about linking particularly with Twitter or with Facebook. and how we might actually bring this to life and where we might do that. Who knows about South by Southwest in Austin in Texas? Show of hands. I know some people down here, but has anyone been? I've been. But obviously, the idea there was, if you're going to launch something like this and you're really going to have that much buzz around it, South by Southwest is a festival that happens in Austin, Texas in March each year. It's a conglomeration of all the best people that work in tech platforms around the world. And it happens for a whole week. It's kind of like the Davos as digital, as my boss calls it, Bonin. And within that, you have a huge amount of people who are influencers in technology, influencers in what we deem to be innovation, and they're all in one place at one time. There's a big music festival attached to it as well, which comes after. There's also a film festival attached to it. So Austin is overrun for a week in March during South by Southwest Festival. We know we wanted to launch it at that. And even back then, we were thinking about actually doing it in some kind of vehicle and maybe having that, seeing a series of dispensers that happen on the side of the vehicle and how we were going to do that. And then we started to play around this idea of mixing up flavors. The equipment we used for it was going to have to be pretty smart. It was going to have to be really surgical grade in terms of its hygiene factors, etc., the way we were going to actually distribute this. And then we were thinking about how we were going to get the cream on a cookie and produce different forms and varieties. So take us back to Maya, and this is some of the ideation we were doing there, very much from the journey people were going to have, and we explored it beyond the idea of a van to bring it to the idea of much more of a experience where we'd have a trending vending lounge and people could spend time there and go through the process of vending their cookie, which I'll show you in a minute. But it wasn't an easy journey, and the whole thing was put together in 100 days, which is quite exceptional to have to do that. And how we were going to deliver the cookie cream so that you had all these different variants that you would choose yourself had all kinds of problems associated with it.
Doesn't look like it's quite making contact. Well,
This is our first attempts, which came out as a fail, but I'll have a look at it.
Were you at 14?
Some of the mechanics and how they would work, some of the technology we were going to use, and how we were going to build these cookies. But I'll show you how this first came out with the first attempts to run cream on these cookies, which wasn't good.
I think this is going to be cool to watch.
So that wasn't necessarily going to work too well, and we had a lot of failed attempts on that, as you can imagine. It didn't look particularly pretty, but this was the framework of what we were going to produce. Now, I think it was 16 tubes, various flavors and varieties, and how we were going to actually sort of create this almost bespoke cookie that was vending out of the machine. So a lot more work, a lot more time went into it, and we started to build a framework of how it was going to look, the background of how it was going to be, and tied to that, how are we going to connect technology with the idea of just vending a cookie? Because that would just be one thing to say, I just want a bespoke cookie, but how are we going to link that to what we did with what was happening in culture within South by at the actual time? And the idea was to link that with Twitter and this hashtag of eat the tweet. And what does eat the tweet really mean? Well, there's a lot of Twitter going on, obviously, at an event by Southwest. Biz Stone was actually presenting there, he was there. But what's actually happening in Twitter and what people were saying and what people were writing down was then ranking in terms of we designated a type of cookie towards that, a title variant that goes with it. And you could actually go, basically, they now have the idea of eating what was being talked about at the festival itself. A little story about that I'll come on to in a minute, but eat the tweet was whatever's trending, and whatever's trending and happening at the event, we'll produce a cookie representation of that. And it should be pretty cool, right? We had to have a qualified snack markup language for the technical people in the room. We actually produced our own algorithm for how that was going to work and what was trending, donated to actually what kind of version of cookie we would have. And we had lots and lots of different varieties. You could produce swirls, you could produce patterns, you could produce stripes, you could produce diamonds. There was actually in overall 16,380 different combinations of cookie that you could vend, and several choices to do that. So we designated a load to whatever the top trending was, but we also gave people the opportunity to just bespoke make their own cookie. And then we need an interface for doing that. And it needs to be pretty interesting, right? So if you can just go up to this vending machine, it's not going to be a case of pressing buttons. It's going to be an interface that actually you're going to have some real communication and exchange with. So these were touch screens. I'll show them to you in a video at the moment. And then we had things trending, obviously, for Sochi, for the games, or whatever it was going on, whatever the hashtag was. And a touchscreen version which was opaque, that would go clear to vend the cookie, and then go back to opaque again. And it was really innovative in terms of how we did that. So everything got built. It was all done in the Midwest and then transferred down to Austin in Texas, looking a bit like this. This is a prototype. We only had one version in the world still at this time, and that's what it was. And this is what it looked like. We opened up first day. We managed to get everything there in time, just about. And we opened up for the Trending Vending Lounge on day one. And here's the interface so you can see how it works. And the idea here is you'd select different types, either in terms of a hashtag for what was trending at the time, or obviously producing your own cookie with your own variants. And an interesting story, because the two machines, the one on the left-hand side was mostly vending out what was happening in terms of the trending at the time at South by. So it would be for Sochi, or if it would be for hashtag Bistone, or hashtag for even South by Southwest was one of the hashtags. Very, very few people actually wanted to engage with that. Most people wanted to actually design their own cookie from scratch themselves and say, I want to have this design, I want to have this wafer, and I want to do it that way. The queue for that one was 2 hours long. The queue for the other one was minimal, to say the least. So there was a really big insight from this, which is actually people wanted to just produce their own version and actually produce what was right for them. A lot of people going on in the background, lots going on in the back room. These are the people actually behind it. Don't look behind the curtain, but that's the Wizard of Oz. And basically, mostly their job was to make sure the machines were still running properly. We did pretty well with that, and make sure all the fillings went in time, and we weren't running out of stuff. So automatically, this thing is joined up and working. And it was all about the customization. It was all about that unique ability for someone to have a cookie that it was just tailored for them. We had fast prototyping. This thing was all done in 100 days, as I mentioned. We didn't have a lot of time to do it, but we managed to turn it around in fantastic time frames. The trend is just as important as the taste. So we need to make sure the cookie and what you got out of it was, of the highest quality, and still had, resonance and link to what we were doing for South by at the time with the Twitter handles. The experience really mattered, and even when people had to wait in the rain, we got some bad feedback for that, because it rained on day 2 on the Saturday. Unfortunately, there's a lot of rain, and people here tweeting, influencers saying, "I've been here for an hour, no cookie, give me my cookie, I want my cookie now." But they still did that in the rain, which was quite something. But overall, the feedback was very, very high. We had a huge amount of feedback from this, a lot of PR, a lot of people tweeting about it. You've got to remember, this place is full of all the key influencers, pretty much in the world in tech, all wanting to engage with what we did. The Trending Vending Lounge itself was actually right outside of the conference center. And as a result of that, we had a lot of through traffic and a lot of people engaging with it. So Eat the Tweet. We had one of our largest spikes, obviously, in social conversation. Those who may know about Dunk in the Dark and what was done at the Super Bowl 2 years ago, because it's a very famous case of that. We had our highest tweet since then. A lot of buzz and lot of mentions on media, and obviously the Twitter engagement is higher than anybody else who was doing activations at the time who were in this space at South by Southwest. So I think I'm going to show you a video, which I think I'm probably going to finish off with. Will encapsulate you really with what we did and how it went on, so you get a flavor for it. And also you'll see my boss on here, Bonin, who was one of the originators of this idea. If that works. It's not working. No. Right.
We're at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas.
Technology.
We're standing in the Trending Vending Oreo Lounge.
Hang on. I need some help.
We know that our fans are so passionate about flavors that we wanted to give them this unique consumer experience that's never been done before in the world. So what we created was the first cream printer that takes what's trending in Twitter and actually turns that into...
I'll just come off that because it's the last one. It didn't run.
Did it run?
So yeah, it's this one.
Oh, Jimmy.
It's that one.
Jimmy.
Ah. You've put it in again. What was just running then? That's right. The big final, the big finish, the video on the last slide video, which was just running. Yeah. If you can run that, it should be that one. It's not that video. No, it's not. No, it's not that video. It's the last one, which you were just hearing. It's not that one. It's the last slide. I've got it anyway. So it's not this.
Now watch the screen.
It's not this one. Okay, we've had that. All right. Okay. So the last video, which is in the last. It's not that one. Hold on a second. I do have it actually on the stick with me. Yeah, if you want to, because we've kind of built towards this. So, in the last slide. The very last slide. Okay. Okay. It should be in there. Yeah. But that's not the one he's been running. It should be in there. If you play that. No, stop that. You've deleted it.
Now watch the screen.
Hold on a second, I'll get it for you. You've deleted it when you put it in. Sorry about this. Yeah, good things are worth waiting for. Right. There it is. You need a stick. Right. Apologies for this. I'll run it off here. You've put the video in twice, the same one. This is a different video that was embedded in it. Okay. Now, if you open up the stick. Sorry about that. What happened is we replaced the video earlier, and they've replaced both of them. I'm going to do... no, that's not it. I'll show you. Let's put it in here.
Maybe a few seconds.
Yeah, okay. Because I've got it embedded. Typically, it should be that one. Okay, we put it on display and play that. Try that. Try that. Right, okay. When you put the video in for slide 12, you did it for the last one as well.
Because it seems you don't.
Yeah, that's it. Right, okay. Sorry about that. It should give you an idea of it.
We're at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and you're standing in the trending vending Oreo Lounge. We know that our fans are so passionate about flavors that we wanted to give them this unique consumer experience that's never been done before in the world. So what we created was the first cream printer that takes what's trending in Twitter and actually turns that into an Oreo cookie. So now I hit make cookie, and this is when the magic begins to happen.
We had a milk bar up there as well for people to dump their cookies afterwards. And there you go. So, Wonderfield, our new campaign was coming on for this year. I won't tell you too much about that, but that's it. Apologies for the technical error at the end there, changing my video, but that was Trending Vending. Now it's coming to China. Fingers crossed, all being well. And we're looking to do that in July, bring it over here and have it exhibited here as well on one of the big events which we'll have, and I'll tell you more about that in time. But slightly lighter version of what we did. But it was incredibly popular. It had a huge amount of interest. Why would you do that, you say? Why would you go through all of that to produce it? Is it just a cool thing to do? Well, not really. What it actually allows us to do is capture an awful lot of information and data. A huge amount of information on what people really like and what they really want delivered to them and actually what they really want to engage with. And this idea of bespoke, this idea of creating something for yourself, and here obviously doing that in a vending machine and the ability to where that goes in the very near future is of great value to us. So that was a huge, a huge step forward, a huge innovation, and we'll be bringing it to China very soon. Okay, I think that brings us back on time.